Leaflets claiming that new relationship education lessons will encourage primary school children to masturbate have been handed out in East London, this programme has learned. It comes after protests in Birmingham against LGBT teaching made headlines. Other leaflets said parents will be questioned on the day of judgement if they don't challenge the lessons.
Now, in today's exclusive film, this programme has learnt that leaflets telling parents that new relationship education lessons in infant school would encourage their children to masturbate have been handed out in East London. Another told parents if they don't challenge relationships and sex education, they would be questioned on the day of judgment. Well, protests against one particular programme of relationship teaching called No Outsiders at primary schools in Birmingham made national headlines earlier this year. And there are now fears there will be more protests in other parts of the country as the new school year begins. We've been speaking to the people trying to oppose them. Catherine Nye reports.
From next September, it will be compulsory to teach relationships education in primary schools in England and relationships and sex education, RSE, in secondary schools. The government wants teaching to include things like single-parent families, adoption and same-sex relationships. But, it says, it will be up to schools to decide when that's age appropriate. Now, since January, this issue has prompted leafleting campaigns and protests outside some primary schools, most notably in Birmingham.
They can't tell you when and how they should be taught. You have a say in the matter.
In Newham, East London, parents have been targeted at the school gates. So this is the leaflet that was handed out right here at this primary school.
Yeah, as you can see, there's like a variety of untruths in this. It says things like that it's going to, inclusive RSE is going to promote transgenderism, that it's going to promote homosexual lifestyles, that it's going to teach children in infant school about having sex and being encouraged to masturbate. Of course, when parents see these kinds of untruths being peddled, they are worried. So the moment we found out about it, we brought it up in full council and we questioned, who exactly is this group and why are they spreading this kind of misinformation to parents? And what exactly is their agenda? Because it's not about helping children and it's definitely not about helping parents.
The group that distributed that leaflet is called the School Gate Campaign. They stand by most of the claims but have removed the specific accusation about children being encouraged to masturbate. Their new flyers say that some teaching resources will introduce words like masturbation to juniors. This is written in draft teaching guidance for at least one local authority in England. Parents at this school, though, have already seen the exaggerated claims, and Councillor Rohit Dasgupta argues the damage has been done. He shows me more of the material that's been circulated locally. So this is the kind of material that's been sent around, in WhatsApp groups?
Yeah, so these are a lot of private WhatsApp groups for parents.
This post urges parents to come to a meeting about RSE teaching and says there'll be consequences if you don't.
If we fail to attend, then the schools will continue teaching our children what they like and will be questioned on the day of judgment. We will be questioned on the day of judgment. Now, that is a very scary thing to put on a leaflet like this, especially if you're a person of faith. There has been a lot of intimidation that a lot of councillors have faced over here in terms of from both party members as well as residents living in their ward who come and question them, why are you supporting this? This is something that's going to affect my child. And I think there's a lot of misinformation. That is the main problem.
Is it not totally legitimate for parents to express concerns about what their children are taught?
I think it's important that parents are consulted, and I think it is important that parents are told exactly what their children are taught. But at the end of the day, the teachers, the head teachers, the curriculum educators are the experts over here. This is not something that has come out of nowhere. This is about making sure that we teach our children about equality, that we teach our children that it is okay to be different, that we teach our children that they don't grow up to become bigots.
Birmingham has been the focus of the protests against relationship and sex education, particularly these two schools, Parkfield Community School and Anderton Park Primary. The protesters so far, while often opposing relationships and sex education broadly, have particularly objected to a set of books used to teach it in primary school, called No Outsiders. The books include stories like a boy who wants to dress as a mermaid and a penguin with two daddies.
Two penguins in the penguin house were a little bit different. One was named Roy and the other was named Silo.
In Birmingham, a group of locals are producing a video showing children and parents reading from the books. They want to make people less worried about what's in them.
I know that from Parkfield and from over at Anderton Park Primary School that there's some parents who are quite happy with the programme, but unfortunately I'm hearing stories that they're being intimidated, harassed or threatened. Some of them have been accused of being not Muslim enough. They feel somewhat isolated from the community at large because at the end of the day they have to fit into that community.
Javed Iqbal also lives in Birmingham. He's a member of the Alum Rock Community Forum, a group covering the same area as Parkfield School. His children went there, and now his grandchildren. In the early days of the protest, he spoke on behalf of the parents as part of the Parkfield Parents Group. But he says the protests now have to stop.
They're not helpful at all. We're grown-up adults, we're educated enough to sit around a table and to resolve these issues around a table instead of standing outside of school and shouting and screaming.
Do you understand why people felt the need to protest?
Depending who you're talking about. I mean, a lot of the parents, they had no choice but to protest because obviously they weren't being listened to.
Javed, however, says people from outside the community had no business getting involved in the protests.
Stay away from them schools, stay away from their children and stay away from their education. You know, how much do you really care? Because we've never seen you here. A lot of the people that have actually come to the area, what is in it for you? You know, you're just here possibly for publicity, you know, stunt, or just get the media fame.
How much of the protest do you think was genuine concern and how much was just straight up homophobia?
Majority of it is a genuine concern. I mean, I don't believe, okay fine, there might be a few that might be homophobic, but I don't believe the whole community is homophobic.
Javed involved in mediation between parents and the school, which he says has not actually been very successful.
It's still left in limbo, really, to be honest. And a lot of parents have removed their children to look for alternative schools in the area.
Hi! Yehudis Fletcher is an Orthodox Jew living in Manchester. Can I come in? She has 3 young children who attend Orthodox schools. Yehudis is very pro-relationships and sex education, but says that many within the community are not, including some people running Orthodox schools who don't want to teach it. What are your concerns if pupils don't get this kind of education?
I think that the children who need sex and relationship education the most are the children whose parents or the schools that they go to are trying to deny it to them. Those are the children who are likely to be in an environment where they can't speak up if they're being abused. I can't really comment on other communities, but I know that within my community there are people who want children to remain largely ignorant about sex and relationships because they want them to carry on with the traditional way in which they're married at a very early age without much knowledge about what they're getting into.
Other people might argue that it's simply people whose religion doesn't accept homosexuality, for example, not wanting their children taught things they don't believe at home.
I don't think anybody doesn't believe that homosexuality exists. They might think that homosexual acts are forbidden, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they absolutely will have a certain percentage within them who are LGBTQ. That's not something anybody can deny.
Yehudis has been outspoken in her support for RSE, but says many people don't have her confidence. Do you know specific examples where parents have wanted to say, I'm okay with relationship education, but feel like they can't?
Yes, absolutely. Many of them have been in contact with me directly because I've written about it and spoken out about it. They've contacted me privately and said, you know, thank you for speaking out because I can't.
Do you think the kind of protests we've seen in Birmingham could come here?
I think they will. I'm really worried about that. The good thing is in this borough the council is very, very united in opposing any anti-SRE campaigns that come up. It will not be an easy ride, when the government leaves it onto local authorities and leaves it onto teachers and head teachers. It's not going to be easy, but I think we are going to be doing our best to make sure that the level of really vile protests that we saw in Birmingham doesn't come over here in Newham.
Well, let's talk more about that report by Catherine Nye. We can speak now to Antonia Tully from the Safe at School campaign. It's against the mandatory teaching of relationship education at primary schools. The campaign is part of the Society for the Protection of Unborn Children. It's an anti-abortion group. Also with us is Andrew Copson, who is from Humanist UK. They've been campaigning in favour of relationship and sex and relationships education. Thank you both for coming in to speak to us. Antonia, first of all, what is it that you're opposed to within the teaching in schools? Is it things like we saw in the report about same-sex relationships, or is it also about the language that is going to be used?
Well, I think it's more fundamental than that. What we've seen with this new piece of legislation is the government taking over from parents the role that is rightfully theirs. Parents are the people, they're the children, the primary educators of their children, and they should be the ones talking to their children about the intimate details of sex and about different sorts of relationships when they feel their child is ready to hear these things. So with this new legislation, which comes into force in September 2020, the government's done three things. It said parents are stupid, they're inadequate. We've got to take that. They have.
Not. Let me read you a statement. Let me read you a statement.
We can't trust parents.
That's not what they're saying. Let me read you this statement from the Department for Education. It says, we want pupils growing up in the 21st century to understand the world around them and know what positive and safe relationships of all kinds look like, which is why we're making relationships education compulsory. At primary school, this starts with family and friends, how to be kind and recognising the difference between online and offline friendships. Schools should consult with parents when developing the content they use, and it must be delivered in an age-appropriate way.
Well, I'm not seeing that, and I'm hearing from parents who are not seeing that either. And, why can't parents teach these issues to their children? Why is the state taking over and making it mandatory? I'm afraid the government's message is we don't trust parents to do this. We've got to do it. And there are many, many hundreds of parents, thousands even, who don't like that, who are worried, who are nervous about what their children are going to be taught. So we're defending parents.
Andrew?
Parents are obviously always going to be the primary caregivers and influences in their children's lives, but it's naive to think that they're going to be the only ones moulding their children. Wider society, wider culture does that. And a lot of the messages in wider society and wider culture can be very negative about sex and relationships, and ones that are dangerous. That's one of the reasons why children, who are human beings with rights of their own, need education in schools about sex and relationships to make up what might not be offered at home. And the sort of education that's being introduced is very age-appropriate, is designed to lead to healthier, happier, safer lives for children. I think it's completely justified, and most parents, when they're asked in opinion polls, do want schools to provide that education.
Well, in a government consultation last year, 42% of people, combination of parents and grandparents, disagreed strongly with the way in which the government wants to teach children about different sorts of relationships and sex education.
What would you be happy with seeing on the curriculum for students?
I'm not happy that this law has been passed and now the government has taken over.
There should be any sex education in schools?
I think schools have a very positive role in supporting parents in talking to their own children about these matters. Parents are the experts, and I think this narrative which is trying to say that parents are inadequate to the job, we don't trust them, therefore the government's got to take over, we've got to decide when your child learns about these things, what they learn and how they learn about these things. And that's very worrying, and we're encouraging parents precisely to have a consultation with the school, ask the school, what are you going to be teaching my child? And we really hope that schools will listen to parents.
Can you understand, though, there's a real concern amongst some parents that control is being taken away?
Of course I do, and it's inflamed by the sort of lurid materials that your report was about. But I think it's an exaggeration. In every other area of human life, of human knowledge, of human experience, and every other area of learning about our society and learning about ourselves, we accept that education institutions in our society have a legitimate role to play in bringing expert knowledge and pedagogy to bear on those issues. Sex and relationships are no different from those issues. And like I said, it's true that a minority of...
What are you worried about? Are you worried that it's essentially sexualising children, or that they're being exposed to things that maybe you disagree with?
Well, I think there are a lot of parents out there who, for example, and this is going back a couple of decades, who have been very disturbed by sex education programmes like Living and Growing, for example, which is precisely talking to primary school-age children about masturbation. It's precisely showing...
It's not about that. Let me explain
to you.
Well, it is
about that. It is about that. That's been in schools for a long time now.
Well, my children are at primary school and they certainly aren't spoken to about masturbation, but I can tell you that we have spoken to some councils that have been named in this, and they are saying when they're talking about things like masturbation, what it actually is preparing in case a year 5 or a year 6 child brings that into the conversation. The teachers want to enable themselves to be able to talk about that without just batting it away, and talking about it in a sensitive and appropriate way.
And the home is a sensitive and appropriate place for these discussions to take place. And I just think...
What happens if parents feel a bit uncomfortable? I don't know. We get a bit icky about this, don't we?
Because they don't necessarily want to be the people who have to take those topics on.
Do you want to have that conversation? Do you want to have that conversation with your kids? I don't know. It's a bit awkward. You do.
I do want to have that conversation with my children, and I know hundreds and thousands of parents that I've spoken to over the years, they want to be able to talk about those things with their children. And I think this idea that somehow modern parents are not up to this job is just a slap in the face for parents. And I think it's very, very sinister, actually.
Even if that's the case, children have an entitlement also to a broad range of views. And that, you know, the messages they might hear in the home about relationships and sex education, especially when it comes to, for example, same-sex relationships, are not the only messages that exist in the world. And so they have an entitlement to a broad range of knowledge. And if they don't get it, then many children will continue in ignorance. And there's a sort of myth that ignorance for children is bliss. It's not bliss. It's higher rates of STIs, it's more unhappiness, it's less healthy, less safe children.
We could talk about this for so much longer. I'm so sorry we're out of time, but thank you ever so much, both of you, for coming in. I'm very grateful to you.